Good day, thanks to God, and welcome to our conversation for today as we continue our study of how to build an Acts 2 community, make disciples, not Christians. Today we're going to be discussing chapter 8 of our book, which is entitled Church Misunderstood. So we're going to talk about some of the concepts of church that obviously have been misunderstood in the context of the way Jesus expressed it in the scriptures and the way that it was applied in the New Testament text. And we can liken the word church being misunderstood to another word that's commonly misunderstood in obvious operation, and that word is pastor. So I think the word church has become gravely misunderstood. And I have many a friend ask me why I still stick with the word. And I admit that when people say, I want to come to your church, I always warn them that it doesn't look quite like what you might associate with the word. Another way of saying it is sort of in the same vein of an experiment I heard about years ago, where a bunch of people were asked, when you think of the word Christian, what do you think of? Some of the answers were right winged, judgmental, against homosexuals and abortion, political, and mean. Think about those responses, saints. Then this experiment, the people were asked, when you think of Jesus, what do you think of? And their answers were mercy, love, compassion, and grace. So think about this, children of God. If the average person was asked what they thought of when they heard the word church, my guess is they would say Sunday morning worship, music, a sermon, prayer, potlucks, either really boring or really inspiring, depending on which kind of churches they've been a part of. So as we pull all these thoughts together, it is very doubtful to me that people would associate the word church with deep and meaningful connections with people, carrying each other's burdens, fellowship and eating with one another, sharing resources, advocating for the marginalized, and bringing the good news to hard places together in practical and tangible ways. So at some point, children of God, I'll have to do an experiment and test my theory. Yes, I think it's fairly easy to build what we typically call church. The typical elements are not that hard to find: a gathering place, to have music, to have a message, and some kind of programmatic glue that usually do the trick. And if music and the message are good enough, some Christians will find their way there. Now, I'm not saying they will come in droves. I think it's a unique phenomenon these days, but I do believe that the basic elements are there. Some people will come and find what they're looking for. But as we look at these topics in the context of building communities, it's a whole other thing. So let's look at some of the ways that we can approach this as we step out and continue the development of our communities. I believe that finding ways to knit heart together, to share life and meals, to gather around a common purpose, but allow for a wide range of diversity and perspectives, to nurture a spirit of justice and action, and somehow create a safe and challenging container to learn to love Jesus, to love ourselves, and to love others, as well as being loved by Jesus, being loved by ourselves, and being loved by others requires a different way of thinking. This is the challenge that we face, is that we must unthink or unlearn things in order to learn and to think anew. Now, as we look at this continued discussion about the church misunderstood, as we continue with chapter 8 of our book, How to Build a Christian, Acts 2 Community, making disciples and not Christians, we can see as we look at our society today, some have started churches and have tried to mix these two models. Some wanted people to come, so they figured out a way to make sure there was music and teaching and a somewhat good vibe. But at the same time, they were not quite certain that they wanted to make sure that no one ever said, I go there because I love the teaching, preaching, or I love the music, or I love the kids' programs. Thanks to God, we should always want people to say, I go there or I gather there because of the people, because of the love, because of the caring, because of the support and encouragement and edification that we give one another. So I don't want us to get caught up in the moment of intentionally, for instance, wrapping up music or trying to give provocative and innovative teaching in order to get people addicted to something that ultimately is a want, not a need. I want you to think, children of God, as I think people get confused by that. And they keep waiting for you to find your stride. And after about a year of muddling around or fiddling around and trying to find ourselves, it becomes clear that we are mixing models that cannot be mixed. It's like putting oil in water and expecting the oil to become water. You always find that they will separate from one another. So, what must we do, children of God? We must begin to let go of the need to make people happy. That cannot be the primary reason why we gather as a community, or we gather for worship, or we gather for prayer or teaching, or whatever type of services that you're involved in. Again, we must let go of the need to make people happy and lean into what is deep within our hearts, which is a desire to cultivate a diverse, experiential, advocacy infused, transformational healing community. As I look at the book of Acts and I look at the interaction between Jesus and his disciples, we can certainly see this in action. I have also found that many people aren't quite as interested in those things. They are looking for inspirational teaching because they always need a fix. They're looking for good music because they need to be encouraged emotionally. And sometimes they're looking for something amazing for their kids because they can't interact with their children in a way that keeps their interest. So instead of jumping through hoops, children of God, instead of juggling things that don't fit together, instead, my word and encouragement for each one of you is that we should offer a place to dialogue and to be challenged on our faith and our life journey. It's okay, it's perfectly fine to have music once in a while. It's a great point in which people can gather in a spirit of unity with each other. We also need to understand that there are lots of messy, wonderful grown-ups who will love each other and know each other's names and will thrive in building community. If we were to get past the surface activities, we could get deeper into things beneath the surface where the matters really affect our lives. So we want, of course, that this is not the only way that is. These are simply some suggestions or ideas by which we can be transformational thinking. Sometimes we start to think that our way is the best way or the only way, but that is not the case. It feels that way to you because it fits what you have always dreamed about deep in your heart, or it seems that way because it's the only thing you've been exposed to. Even when we couldn't or we can't articulate it properly, or really even allow ourselves to believe that it might be possible. So when it comes to church, children of God, when it comes to these developing an Acts 2 community, we need to create a culture of equality, authentic healing, community generosity, and faith in action, not just words or idea. Now, I respect and recognize there are all kinds of people who value and love different forms of church or liturgy, and I don't want to dismiss all of their preferences, but at the same time, I still do think there are a lot more churches being built rather than communities being built. Our focus in this study and teaching and our model for going forward in our villages is to build communities, not facilities. Let me say this again. Our model is to build communities, not facilities. We want to cultivate an atmosphere where we understand the difference between building facilities and building communities. And that's what this discussion, as we go through this book, is all about. And despite of all the new and beautiful ideas that are being experimented with out there in the big wild kingdom of God, there's still a long way to go in shifting from some of these strongly held notions of church, where preaching, music, meeting place, and programs, even if they are packaged in a quote unquote cooler way, still seem to be the primary things that people associate with church. It's just knit into the fabric of our Christian culture in the West. And while I believe many strides are being made to turn that tide, I still think the notion of cultivating communities is very underrated, undervalued, and for the most part, unknown. I also think it's in many people's hearts to do and try. I think underneath the surface, as we talked about getting past the surface things of the sermons and the singing and the praying, get beneath the surface, I believe that in many people's hearts, they want to have community. They want to have authentic connection with other people. They want to experience mercy and grace from people. Most of the hurt that people have experienced in life is not hurt that was produced by God. It was hurt where the source is other people. So people want to be healed, and one of the key ways of doing the healing is that we heal one another by undoing the hurt, the destruction, the chaos that other people may have caused, or the environment in which other people may have experienced with others. So let's strive to go deeper, children of God. It's almost like we know somewhere deep that is where it is at. But the culture of our society is so strong toward the old, typical models that it pulls us in the other direction. I was talking to some friends who are looking for a new church in the city. that they moved to. And what they have encountered is a wide range of diverse churches that seem to all be replicating the same old with a different twist. Always call it putting new wine into old wineskins. Thanks to God, I really think that we have to become less afraid to make new skins. That is, to make radically different models of living in community together in a wide variety of contexts. In fact, it's not even being radically different models. It is simply getting back to the model that we see on display in Acts chapter 2 in the scriptures. So, anyway, there are a few of my thoughts that I shared with you about the difference between cultivating communities and building churches. So let's talk about some of the thoughts about the differences between these two things. Again, we're talking about the difference between cultivating communities and building churches. If you'd like to take notes, here's number one. Cultivating a community requires an extremely high level of relationship that many of us haven't learned to really do. Now, this is where I think the church has done a disservice to many people. We have focused on Bible teaching, but not Bible application. Even though we know it doesn't work that way, we keep thinking teaching about love will equal love. The way to learn how to love is to love, children of God. And the only way we can learn how to love is to practice in close relationship and have our lives rub against each other. We see in scriptures that Jesus calls us to love. In fact, the scripture text says, I command that you love one another. Now, really love can't be ignored. And like so many other ways of the kingdom, it requires a level of commitment that most of us aren't really excited to make. Because we have in our mind that of fear of rejection or dealing with some of the past memories of hurt. So being devoted to sacrificial love for one another can't happen when we are just sitting in pews and listening to a message and go home and hang out in a small group that talks about the Bible, but never what's really going on in the deep places of our heart and sharing our experiences. Number two, cultivating a community isn't very sexy and requires a long view. It is not a instant message, quick fix type of thing that we become so accustomed to in this world. I think that's because of the first one. That is, real relationships with messy people can be hard. Life change never happens in a snap, children of God. Slogging it out over the long haul with people is brutal and it tries our patience. The fruit is harder to see sometimes. It is completely imperceptible to the un-Jesus trained eye. The results, our human nature always tends to look for, is sometimes elusive when you're developing and cultivating relationships. Church building looks for a quicker fix. Look for success stories, things to capitalize on, to take it to the what we call the next level. But cultivating community requires a longer sense of view than just a 30-minute, 40-minute sermon. It requires more than a one day a week activity, if that at all. It requires, as we see in the book of Acts, They met daily from house to house, teaching, prayer, breaking bread, and fellowship. That's what cultivating a community looks like. Number 3, cultivating a community requires breaking down power differentials. That's what I love about true community, saints of God, where brothers and sisters of all walks of life really in the trenches doing life together. Real community, listen, saints, real community crosses the boundaries of gender, socioeconomics, education, and all kinds of other great divides that tend to typically separate us. I think that's because in true community, the relationships aren't to or for, but they are truly with one another. Not doing this to someone or for someone, but we're doing this with someone. We like to coin the phrase doing life together. So this takes hierarchy and power and opens up the door for transformation in really powerful ways. Number 4, and the final point I'd like to make with you about cultivating community during this conversation today is cultivating a community usually doesn't make money, or it's not done for the purpose of making money or generating income. Let me explain. Even though people whine about money all the time, the truth is that we should be glad that it's not a big issue as a community. We shouldn't try to get people to get their money. We shouldn't try to gather people in order to gather their money. We shouldn't try to grow our congregations or communities in order to pay the bills, build bigger buildings, or pay off church building mortgages. We shouldn't compromise our values and our core DNA to attract a certain kind of people who would help us not to have to struggle so much. And though some who have means to help with money will come and stay, it shouldn't be because they are being wooed or courted or dated for their money, but they should stay because they have found a place to love and to be loved like everyone else. As we think about the Acts 2 community, we know that these are communities where we should gather because we want to be together, not because we have to be together. That should be enough, children of God. And remember that there is indeed a radical difference between cultivating true community and building churches. So I pray that as you contemplate and think about and meditate on this week's study from chapter 8 of our book, How to Build an Acts 2 Community, Make Disciples Not Christians, we talked about church, or the word church, misunderstood. So hopefully as you review this material, it will help give you a better understanding or a deeper understanding of the ways in which we can function and set our sights on the right goal of building community, not churches. Thank you, children of God, for your time today. I look forward to the next opportunity. As always, feel free to reach out, contact us. Our email is info at agministries.net. If you're looking for a way to connect with us, you can visit our main website, www.agministries.net. AG stands for Amazing Grace Ministries.net. And so, saints, again, I appreciate this opportunity. I look forward to sharing with you in further discussions, and may God's power, presence, and peace be upon you. Good day.